I think. It's really complicated because I don't want to be like, I'm okay with guns because I'm not.
Right.
But like putting down more restrictions is going to, I'm trying to like form this in a coherent thought.
Yeah.
I'll start over.
Hey, it's your girl Asante, helping you move consciously and creatively through life, so let's go. I have a super special guest on the channel today. I got to hang out with Taylor, i.e. ItsRadishTime. We had been talking about filming for ages, so I'm glad that I got to sit down with her and talk about identity and privilege and some things that she's gone through as far as discovering her identity and some social issues that should be viewed through an intersectional lens. So without further ado, hey, it's Asante, and today I'm here with Taylor.
Hi. My name's Taylor. My channel is ItsRadishTime. It's a channel about storytelling and also social change.
Cool. Yeah, Taylor is awesome, and a lot of times our topics will overlap. We are kind of on the same wavelength a lot of times. So today we're going to be talking about intersectionality. This is part of a series that I've done with a couple folks on intersectionality and what their identities have meant to them. So Taylor, what does intersectionality mean to you?
For me, intersectionality is the idea that whenever you're talking about social justice and progressive issues, when you're trying to solve a problem for any particular group, you have to understand that people in that group also belong to all sorts of other identities that could be privileged or marginalized or anything on the range of that spectrum.
Yeah.
When you're trying to make life better for people in general, you have to understand that people belong to all sorts of identities and that all of those exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you can't ignore any part of them and be serving that person.
Yeah. That's a great definition. You can't just isolate people's particular characteristics. You have to be thinking about the whole. What are your different identifiers that you use?
I identify as a queer woman of color. That's kind of I'd say queer cisgender woman of color, because I don't think it's necessarily fair that cis is the default and cis people don't have to say that they're cis. But yeah, that's how I identify.
So now it's time to check our privilege.
Okay.
So
let's check it.
Let's check our privilege. So I have a list of privileges here that I'll read off of. So educational privilege. Check for me. White privilege.
So this is complicated. Because I'm multiracial.
Yeah.
So I do have a white parent. I myself, I'm not white passing. I'm not, I don't have white privilege in that sense, but I also have the privilege if you think about things like colorism.
Yeah.
I'm light skinned. I have a certain texture hair. So a lot of times, being a black woman, I'm kind of a safe black person to white people. And so that's a privilege in itself.
Yeah, like light-skinned privilege.
Yeah.
Male privilege.
Nope.
Class privilege. I'm gonna check.
I would say check.
Yeah, definitely middle class. Christian privilege. Check for me.
Question mark. I was raised in a Christian family, but I kind of have no religious affiliation.
Right now.
Yeah.
Able-bodied privilege.
Check.
Heterosexual privilege.
Not a check.
Fun fact, I came out since my last intersectionality collab. Woohoo! Cisgender.
Check.
What is a conversation that you think could benefit from increased intersectionality?
So one that's going on a lot right now is a conversation about gun control and gun safety, which I think is a really, really important conversation to be having. I think it affects so many broad swaths of the American population, but right now that conversation is being led by young people, which is really, really great.
Yeah.
But mostly by white passing young people.
Yeah.
And I think it's a conversation that we have to realize how gun violence affects people of color in a very different way than it affects white people. People of color are often more likely to be the victims of gun violence.
Yeah.
And also, when we talk about mental health or when we talk about people who commit these acts of violence, it's typically young white males. And, there's still kind of this idea that white gun ownership is a right, a constitutional right that we have to defend, but black gun ownership is, dangerous and criminal. And so while I think it's a really important conversation to have, and I'm very much in favor of increased gun safety regulations, we have to realize that that's going to affect Black communities, both victims and gun owners, in a different way than it's going to affect the white community.
Yeah, and when you talk about who is legally allowed to own a gun and who can get shot just for looking like they have a gun,
right?
That they
who can
own
open
legally,
carry and who can reach into their pocket for a cell phone and get shot.
And then get shot, right? That's like people of color typically. So what are some ways in which you've discovered the intersectionality of your own identities and how you've come into those?
So I think for me, it was like a very long and layered process. So for me, growing up in a very white area, I had more internalized racism than, you know, any other bias toward any of my other identities. So that took a lot longer to unpack. But, you know, first I started getting into kind of ideas about feminism and learning about male privilege. And then later when I lived in a more diverse area and started to see more examples for what Blackness could be, I started understanding that a little bit better. And then it took me, you know, I identify as bisexual, and I think it's really common to the bisexual experience to take a long time to realize it, because you think like, well, I like boys like I'm supposed to, so all of these other feelings, like, that's not really real, right?
Yeah.
So it took me until I was like in my early to mid 20s to even realize that I wasn't straight. And so that's been like the most recent thing for me to try to understand. It's been a process of just like layering on top of these identities, and then each time I kind of discover something new about myself, I'm like, okay, how does that work with all of the other ones? And trying to be part of all of those communities and be like, hey guys, feminism's great, but things are a little different. You know, the pay gap's not quite the same for Black women.
Not like 70%. Yeah.
And just like getting my conversations more nuanced every time.
Yeah. What have been like resources that you've found in sort of that process of self-discovery?
A lot of it has just been YouTube and like reading blogs and things that are people speaking from their own experience. I think that's one of the most important things when you're trying to learn about intersectionality, is to listen to the people who live that experience.
Yeah.
So listening to other people who share my experiences and being able to be like, oh, I'm not alone. You go through that too. But also being able to hear from people whose experiences are totally different than mine, and learn that like things about like colorism, and be like, yes, you're Black and that's valid and that's part of your identity, but like also your experience is different than, you know, someone else's experience as somebody who's darker skinned, and like being like, oh, that's another thing that I need to now like understand more.
Yeah.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot, I've been learning a lot about disability in the past year or 2 years. I think it's still something that's being talked about a lot if mental health falls into a category of disability. My understanding is that it just depends on how you identify. So I don't, you know, currently identify as disabled because my mental health, while I do, you know, suffer from different mental health issues, they respond well to treatment. I can afford that treatment. I'm lucky in the sense that I can manage my mental illness. It's been harder at other points in my life, but I don't feel necessarily like it would be fair to claim that title for myself, but it's something that I'm still trying to understand the nuances of.
Mental health is tough because, one, like, people just don't talk about it enough in general.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's something that everybody works with and struggles with, just like physical health. Like, it's something that's a part of everybody's life, but then there's like the different severities and different, you know, things that people work with individually. So increased conversation around that is needed. I'm going to elaborate on what past Asante meant by this. With physical health, it's very measurable and often visible. So, you know, you go to the doctor, they take your weight, they can visually see if you have a rash, they can tell you if you have high blood pressure. It's pretty standard to get a physical examination or take a blood test or something of that sort to tell where you are physical health-wise. But a mental health examination is not as standard, not as basic, and there are less clear benchmarks as far as where you should be mental health-wise. So since it's not even discussed what is typical, I don't know, like, how sad should I be? How sad is the average person? You know, mental health is something everyone struggles with, but is this more struggle than usual? And as far as getting evaluations for mental health, having a psychiatric evaluation in itself tends to set off a red flag, right? People still have stigma around just getting checked out. Going to therapy is just starting to be normalized, whereas, you know, no one thinks twice if you get a physical trainer. So I think that's a space that could definitely benefit from increased discussion and increased normalization of mental health struggles, so that you know what's more individual to someone's experience and what's more commonly experienced. Anyway, that's what I meant by that. Thank you so much to Taylor for such a great conversation and for being on the channel. If you're new here and you're interested in social awareness and life motivation, then you should subscribe so you don't miss new videos. Huge thanks to my Patreon patrons for helping to support this channel. And as always,
remember to live spiritedly and think creatively, and I will see you next time. Bye. Bye.
And I'm just in my head like, do do do.
Yeah. What's been making me happy lately is Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer. Yes, this is a great album, and I've been a Janelle Monáe fangirl for the longest time. Electro-5 Beta. I don't even have enough wall space for how big this poster is. Electric Lady #1. I've been jamming to the new album. I'm a fan of the emotion picture, and the music video she dropped on this one, like, wow, the art direction, the costumes. And I'm not just a fan of her music, I'm a fan of her individuality, her doing her own thing stylistically, how she carries herself, how she's handled her sexuality, whether it's being protective of it in the past or being super open with it now. I love how she got pansexuality trending and how her emotion picture is super queer. Hello. So if you're not on the Janelle Monáe train, what is you doing? Like, get on board. I'll leave a link to her emotion picture in the description. I was also in a video on Taylor's channel on personal mythologies and creative drive and how we characterize ourselves and how we tell stories about ourselves. So I will leave a link to that in the description and in the end screen. Go ahead and check that out. And be sure to subscribe to Taylor while you're over there if you haven't already, because she tells great stories and she's just generally a dope person. Well, I'm gonna go have a crazy, classic life. I'll be right back.
I need to remember what I say at the end of videos. I don't.
Like,
I have like a whole thing. But this has been really fun.
Yeah. Like, deep thoughts on a Sunday.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love having deep conversations.